learning how to come back to our bodies to actually feel what's going on instead of disassociating or becoming highly anxious and pursuing or running away and avoiding and shutting down or placating, fawning, people pleasing. All of these things are our nervous system feeling a dysregulation, not feeling safe, and then having sort of a dysfunctional response that doesn't help us get the result we want, which is connection and love. And so what we're doing, in my programs and in a lot of other, practices with somatic work is about learning how to feel safe in your own body again, learning how to become secure so that little things can be processed, so that little things don't turn into big things. And so that relationships can be more easeful and healthy instead of these roller coasters where chaos is what feels familiar and exciting. And so that is ultimately why I'm so passionate about doing that work, because like I said before, what are we doing this for? It's so we can feel joy and feel the full spectrum of our feelings and just be happy in relationship instead of needing this tumultuous energy to carry us, because that's what we're conditioned to believe is normal, or that we think love is chaos, because that is not fun. And when we have families, it's even more important that we learn how to regulate our nervous systems.
Welcome my guest, Sheleana Aiyana. She is the founder of Rising Women, a growing community of more than 3 million readers. Her training and immersion in couples facilitation, inherited family trauma, family systems, conscious relationship, somatic healing, and plant medicines inform her holistic approach to seeing relationship as a spiritual path. More than 30,000 women in 146 countries have taken her flagship program, Becoming the One. And last year, she released her new book, Becoming the One, Heal Your Past, Transform Your Relationship Patterns, and Come Home to Yourself. Now releasing her newest edition, a guided journal for Becoming the One, which is available now for purchase. Sheleana takes you on a transformational inner work journey to heal lifelong relationship patterns and reclaim power over your life. Welcome back to another episode on Passion, Love, Pursuit. I am so happy to bring on this beautiful gem, Sheleana. I always say your name incorrectly at first. Sheleana Aiyana.
Sheleana
I am so
Aiyana.
honored to bring you back on the show. You are just such a beautiful soul. And I remember our previous episode, I felt not only did I personally gain so much from this episode, I know you in general help millions of people really heal their past, transform their relationships, and really come home back to themselves. And we went through so much in our previous episode, but I'm just so honored to have you back on the show and go a little deeper into this conversation with you. So welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's nice to be here and see your face again and have this conversation.
Yeah, I'm so sorry I chopped up your name. Sometimes it flows so organically, but sometimes it just comes out incorrectly. But I love your name. And I just want to really, first of all, I want to say for anybody that hasn't read her book, Becoming the One, which I have right here, literally this book I would put on the top 5 of must reads. I have shared this book. I've shared my copy which is highly highlighted to other people as well, because I honestly think this will transform so many people's lives. I think even if maybe you're not struggling in something in your life, I think no matter what, there's something that will speak to you in this book. Because I think so many of us might not even recognize our blind spots of really what's going on. And so this will help kind of get more in touch with what is really happening internally, externally in your environments, and maybe what is triggering you and why. So I believe this is a book to help you discover more of yourself. And it's just a gift. And I just thank you for bringing this gift into the world. And as well, to go along with that, your signature program, which is called Becoming the One. So yeah, as we touched on, we recorded early on, I think it was over a year ago before releasing your book. So I'm going to make sure to include that in the show notes because I think you should listen to both of these episodes. We'll go much in detail, in deeper conversation about this today, but go back in the show notes and listen to the previous one so you could hear more about her story. So let's just touch on. So again, in the previous episode, we talked about your story, but if you could kind of touch on right now as far as what has really led you into going into your own healing journey and why you help others heal today? What has really been the catalyst to that?
Yeah, well, I'll abbreviate it so that those who've already listened to the episode don't have to go back, but those who haven't heard it can kind of get a brief picture. And so, as you know, I grew up with a mom who struggled a lot with mental illness, addiction. She had suffered severe abuse herself, so severe PTSD, developmental delay due to trauma. And so I grew up in and out of foster homes, probably by the time that I was 10, had lived in 10 different places. I went to 8 elementary schools in 7 grades. Started, drinking and drugs at 11. Struggled with my own battle with addiction as well, and ended up in abusive relationships that kind of just mirrored the only chaos that I had known in my life. And eventually ended up, going through quite a traumatic breakup, which it was a divorce in my early 20s. That really ripped it all open. It really ripped the rug from underneath me. I lost everything at that time. And it really woke me up to the fact that I had just sort of glazed over my trauma. I had glazed over all of my childhood experiences that really shaped me in a way that prevented me from connecting deeper with myself and also with others, in not only in romantic partnership, but just in friendship and in life. And so there was deep unworthiness, deep low self-esteem issues, just low self-worth in general, and a real fear of using my voice. Uh, just complete shutdown, inability to speak up, inability to be vulnerable. And so when I went through that process, it really catalyzed this unfolding path for me, where I began to go through all of the different modalities that I could to discover myself and to kind of cleanse away that pain so that I could really reclaim who I truly was, my essence, my innate sensitivity, my depth, all of it. And through that process, I discovered that this was a big part of my mission in the world, which I had kind of already known since I was very young, but this sort of solidified it and pushed me onto that path. And then I began to train in this work as well. But so much of my work now, as much as I have so much reverence for all of my teachers, and I have done all of these different trainings, I really feel that I am most informed just by my connection to spirit, my connection to nature, and how I experience the world when I get really quiet and in touch with, just the trees and being outside. And that's ultimately why I'm doing this work. It's like, here, okay, let's just cleanse it all away and remember, why are we here? It's about actually being able to experience joy. It's about experiencing joy and pleasure and happiness. So that's the short version of how I got here.
And I know there's a lot more depth into that. Like I said, to hear her full story and much more what she shared in a previous episode, we share that. And also, of course, in your book, you talk about your story more in depth. But just to
Yeah.
unravel some of that, you were sharing how I know part of your story and kind of awakening moment was when your husband at the time in your 20s, there was a episode when you were in your driveway and he was picking up his stuff with his girlfriend at the time, and you had a moment of kind of awakening that brought you to this realization that you truly needed healing. And so if you could kind of touch on that, because I think this is the important thing, is sometimes we have these moments that really just like shake us and wake us to really the truth of what is happening.
hmm Yeah, it was visceral. He was driving away in his girlfriend's vehicle, and I just had this feeling and this image wash over me of being 3 again, and the moment when I had been dropped off at a foster home in the night and my mom was driving away, and I could just feel it in my body, and I just got this message. This is not about him, this is about you and your childhood. You need to work on this pain right here. And that was such a relief, because the amount of pain I was in from this betrayal, of feeling replaced, of feeling sort of just discarded, it brought up so much for me. And it was so excruciating because of the deep wounds that I carried, right? I didn't have that sense of self. I didn't have that strong self worth. So I was gutted. And the reason the pain was so strong was because of those wounds. And yet, in that moment, when I realized it wasn't about him, I felt so relieved and powerful, because I knew that I didn't need him to change. I didn't need him to come back. I didn't need him to validate me. This was my inside job. This was me and my own inner work and my own inner healing. And that meant that I could be free of this pain without relying on him, which was really important because he wasn't about to participate. And so that was a freeing moment. As painful as it was, I was like, oh, okay, good. This is a good thing. And I think that that's the true reality for most of us. That's the case for a lot of our excruciating painful moments, especially in relationship. It's not that our current and present realities aren't valid, or that our hurts aren't important, or that they're not true. It's that the intensity, when it's gut wrenching, when we feel like we can't breathe, when we feel like we can't go on without another person, when we feel like our lives are over if we can't have them back, that kind of feeling doesn't come from our wise, integrated adult self. It comes from those lost parts that we're here to reclaim. And so that is a big part of the journey too, is recognizing that you have that core relationship to yourself, to your own heart, to your own mind, and that you can be okay even if the relationship ends, or the job is over, or the proverbial rug gets ripped out from underneath you. Can you still be okay? The answer is yes. The connection to you and to, nature, to God, or whatever spirit you connect with, that is your tether.
So beautifully said. And that's so true. And one of the big things you talk about is self-responsibility, or ownership of your life. And that's what this really is about. Your book, Becoming the One, in your signature course, Becoming the One, is about like reclaiming the essence of who you are, your true authentic self. And so very often, I'm sure you hear this a lot in the people you work with. They say to you, I'm sure, I feel so disconnected from who I am. Like, I
Mhm.
feel just so disconnected from, like, I don't even know what I want. I don't even know what I desire. I don't even know who I am anymore. And I feel so many people struggle with that truth that they feel at that moment. And so I believe, and at least this has been my journey as well, is when I did take personal responsibility, like that I played a part in my story, and I turned it on the mirror on myself and took that self responsibility for how I showed up and possibly how I'm behaving and why I'm behaving this way. That's when I feel like I felt empowered, because I was then able to change the trajectory of where I was heading. And so, talking about taking that responsibility, I think a lot of people that feel, trauma has been inflicted on them, or they've endured pain and somebody else inflicted that pain, the idea of them taking responsibility, they get it kind of like it doesn't seem right to them. So if you could kind
Mhm.
of define what ownership and responsibility looks like, and why that is really the thing that will empower you to change the trajectory of your life.
Yeah, well, it's always both and. There's nothing really black and white and so cut and dry about these types of topics, right? And there's always nuance and different circumstances. And I talk a lot about this in my book and in my journal, about forgiveness, and how, sometimes we just have to get to acceptance that what happened happened and that we can't change it. Some things do feel unforgivable. That's also okay. But as long as we're holding on to anger towards somebody else, we're really just letting them live rent free in our minds, and we don't want that. And so how do we get ourselves free of that? That always requires acceptance. We can't skip to acceptance without feeling our hurt and our anger and giving ourselves permission to grieve. And yes, sometimes we are wronged, and sometimes there are things that happen that are just totally unexcusable, and we never deserve that. And we also are never responsible for another person's actions, another person's behaviors, another person's choices. We can impact other people with how we speak and behave. We can certainly inflict pain, or we can provoke people just like they can provoke us. I'm not really of the belief that, nobody can make you feel a certain way. That's certainly not been true in my experience. If someone comes up and slaps me in the face and tells me that I look like shit, I'm gonna feel something about that, right? It's like, yes, we're going to cause feelings for each other, but it's how we react that is our responsibility. And it's how we respond to things in our environment and the people that we're in relationship with. That is where the needle is. And so when I talk about taking responsibility and ownership, I'm in no way saying somehow you've created every reality, that you experience, or that you are somehow God and that everything around you has just been your creation and that you manifested it all, or that you attracted somebody to abuse you. I don't believe any of that. But what I do believe is that we do have the capacity to take ownership for our role in whatever scenario is playing out. And we owe it to ourselves to see how are we co-creating this reality in this relationship. What are we bringing to the table that's causing us to say yes to these types of interactions, that's causing us to be in these types of environments, that's causing us to repeat these patterns? And can we go another layer deeper sometimes and really face off with our own dark side and just own that we're not perfect, that sometimes we're hard to be with, that sometimes we aren't all sunshine and rainbows, and that we can be a difficult person to be in relationship as well, which is true for 99% of us, I would say. And that's just reality. That's just being human. There's nobody on the planet, I don't think, that's perfect, and that's always a joy to be around. And so it's really about that. And it's almost a way to create more harmony in our relationships, because when we come from this perspective that, it's all on you, like I'm in relationship with you and it's just all on you, you're the problem, then the hyper focus on you gives me permission to constantly be in a negative state and to sort of like victimize myself in every interaction. Even if I'm the one, I'm having a crappy day and I'm being super rude or dismissive or abrasive or whatever it is, and I don't like the way that you're responding, but you're always the problem. And so I don't ever have to look at what I'm bringing, and so it's almost a way for us to step out of that dynamic and that blame and that shame. Just be like, yeah, like sometimes both of us are not pleasant, and here's what I can do to shift the tone, shift the dynamic. I'm not talking about abusive relationships. I'm not talking about, or really severe cases here. I'm talking about, in a pretty average relationship where we just have hard times, we have struggles, and even in dating, and so that's where the responsibility piece, the ownership, really comes to the table.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. So when you started on your healing journey, I know you did many different modalities, different therapies, practice lots of different tools to heal yourself. But I know one thing you talk a lot about is healing your inner child. So if you could kind of touch on that, because I know a lot of our triggers come from past woundings, and those triggers generally happen from our younger years. So healing the inner child, what does that work look like, and how does somebody start to possibly walk into doing that themselves? What would be like the first steps to really address that?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, all of us have an inner child, and what I love about now being a mother is just seeing how pure and innocent we all are, right? We all have that innate innocence in us, that essence of wonder and trust and joy and surrender and love and full expression. And that is ultimately what I'm talking about when I say, heal your inner child. What I'm really saying is peel back the layers of defense, cut through the armor that you've built, cut through all of the facades that you've created about your image or who you are or what you believe, and just what's underneath all of that. Where is that desire to just connect with other people, that curiosity of, the world, the desire to be loved and to be seen and to be celebrated, and that ability to be fully expressed in our anger, in our sadness, in our joy, in our frustration, just in all of it, right? If you watch, and I watch my daughter, and she's just so fully expressed. If she's having a moment, she will scream and cry and thrash, and then 30 seconds later, she's giggling and she's smiling and she's clapping. And it's so beautiful to hold space for that and to witness that. And I'm like, oh, right, this is the way that we are supposed to do. Obviously, not to that extent where, we have to contain in certain environments. But ultimately, we need to be able to create space for us to move energy and to be fully expressed and to share that with the people closest to us in a way that is, mature and safe as adults, because so often we just suppress it all. And when we look back at how we had to behave or what we had to do or what, unconscious contracts we had to agree to in order to be received in our family system, those are lost parts. Those are lost parts of ourselves that are wanting recognition. And once we reclaim them, we can be more mature, more honest, more authentic in our adult relationships. And it just requires tenderness toward ourselves. And I think if we were to put it very simply, it would be to just keep going another layer deep. When you have a feeling, what's underneath that feeling?
Mm.
And what's underneath that feeling until you get to the truth.
Love it so much. And I'm just curious, you being a mother now, which you said she's 11 months.
Mm-hmm.
Have you felt any certain things come up in you from your past that possibly had you like stop in your tracks, like, oh, this is happening. I need to like revert this way. Just has anything come up for you as being a mother?
Yeah, the thing that came up for me the most, especially in the very beginning, was a lot of sadness and grief for my own mother.
Mm,
I I always felt sadness and grief for her, and I think because I moved through so much of my own childhood trauma, I did so much of my own healing work prior to becoming a mother in preparation for becoming a mother. Like I really truly was spending almost a decade in devotion to becoming a mother to a daughter. I knew that I was going to have a daughter. And so that was my mission. And so I didn't have a lot of my own childhood stuff come up. But what I was surprised by was the overwhelming grief that I
mm,
felt for my own mother. And I couldn't help but imagine her as this tiny, innocent little baby, just like I was holding in my arms, and just imagining her mother not caring for her and loving her the way that I was loving my daughter, and just feeling this overwhelming sadness constantly about it. And I got a lot of support. I worked with a homeopathic midwife and other guides during this time to support me, because that's been a huge point of grief and healing for me, to just move through some of that. And it also really, yeah, in some ways, it showed me the just the lack of reverence that we have for the sacred role of motherhood,
mm,
and how many mothers, I'm in Canada, it's like different here, but I see it still. We get a little bit of maternity leave, and in the US, there's some moms who are going back to work like a week later or 6 weeks later or 3 months later. And I remember just feeling so sad and heartbroken, because there's so many mothers who didn't want to have to do that, and they felt like they had to in order to survive. And so it was a lot of that kind of stuff that came up for me, as well as, my own existential questions, and feeling just so impermanent. There's nothing like bringing a new life into the world to remind you that you are impermanent,
mm,
and to see, oh, I'm going to walk this being into the world, and likely she's going to walk me out of it. And just that is like, oh, it's just so many things. Yeah, I've just been in my feelings a lot.
I hear you. What would be if you had some advice for mothers, especially based on the work you do? Because I know a lot of people heard the term ending generational trauma, and obviously you've spent over, like you said, a decade healing yourself so that you don't, number one, pass this on as a mother, but also, of course, so you don't continue on these healthy patterns in relationships. But what would be your advice for mothers listening in, uh, preparing either for motherhood or as a mother, so they could show up best to hold the space for their daughter or son? Because I think I listen to Gabor Mate all the time, and he talks about
Mhm.
how important it is to not to let your child express their emotions, because as you talked on earlier, suppressing your emotion is what continues that pain forward. So any
Yeah.
advice you have for mothers, just knowing what you know and all the work you do?
Yeah, wow. I
Loaded
mean, so
question.
you kind of said it though. It's ultimately what I have started to really deeply see as a new mother is that my most important role is to preserve her essence. It's not
Mm,
to teach her who she is. She's already who she is. It's not to get her to be more like me. And it's not to, give her a template of how to be. It's ultimately to support her in keeping her essence, the essence that
mm,
she was already born with, and to support her in being in her highest expression of who she came here to be, who she is already. And the only way that I can do that is by allowing and making space for her full expression, even if it's not working for me, in the moment, if it's not what I want, even if it means opposition, even if it means, disobedience, which is another thing, we could go on a rant about that, but like, I don't even believe that word is appropriate within parenting. I don't,
mm.
she's not here to be obedient to me. She's here to be her own person. I'm here to keep her safe. But I want her to question things and I want her to be her own person. And I don't expect her to always want to do what I say. I just want to keep her alive. And so, I think loosening the grip a little bit and remembering that our kids can teach us so much, watching how they express, watching their curiosity, watching their wonder. Sometimes it reminds me to slow down and to be present and to just be in the moment and to celebrate that. And so, the more that we can do our own emotional work, the more that we can access our own feelings, the more that we can help our nervous systems feel regulated and secure, the more that we will be able to hold for our children. And they will certainly test that. And it's never going to be
Yes.
perfect. When you said like, hopefully, you're not going to pass on any trauma. And I just say, like, wow, I just pray, I don't know what the future holds. I'm a year into this. And there's already been so many moments where I feel like I could have done better. And, I think that's the curse of motherhood is really wanting it to be perfect for them and just knowing, you know what, you have your own feelings too, and it's not always going to be perfect. Um, and I don't think it needs to be perfect. I think we just really need to learn how to be honest, connected, vulnerable, and to learn how to repair. And being that with our children and being that in our relationships, it's really all the same, the same requirements, except for that, in a romantic partnership, there are two people who are equally responsible. And in a parent child relationship, it's really you holding the container fully. So that would be the only difference.
Oh, I love it.
Mm.
I'm actually being, as you were saying, like kids teach us so much. So my stepdaughter is a teenager now. And let me tell you how triggering that has been. And it's
Yeah.
funny because something came up recently where I literally felt, talk about like the mirror being flipped on me, because I realized my reaction and what was triggering me was that like disrespect and degrading my character and stuff like that. And that's a very sensitive, triggering thing for me. And so I
Yeah.
reacted in that. And it made me really turn the mirror on myself and like, where's that coming from? And I realized it came from the emotional abuse I had in a relationship when I was a teenager, her
Yeah.
age. And
Yeah.
it's so it was very interesting and intriguing, and luckily I was able to have that awareness to know where that was stemming from, and kind of look at that and question that. So luckily that's the work I needed to return to and start to address in myself. But it's so true, these triggers, I mean, they're here to, obviously they're warning signs that are going off because something hasn't been healed. So it's something that we need
Mhm,
to look at, like a check engine light. And so you were talking about, you touched on healing our nervous system. And I know the somatic work is so important. And I think I've heard you talk about this, how much it's impacted you as well, doing the work of somatic healing. So can you kind of touch on, like, what does healing the nervous system look like? Because I know this is, I actually was talking to somebody not that long ago about holistic healing for trauma and whatnot. And they were talking about healing the nervous system and what that looks like. So if you could kind of explain, how does somebody go about that?
mhm. Yeah, I actually this year, I created a program called Freedom from Relationship Anxiety, and so much of it is rooted in somatic work. So we have modules every week, and then we go through different somatic processes, and we have a whole library of somatic practices, and some of them are guided by me, and some of them are guided by somatic doctors and other guides who are trained in somatic work. And so much of it is literally just being in the body in these very short little practices that when you're doing them don't really seem like you're doing anything. And people are like, but I
Mm,
don't feel anything. And I'm like, that's normal because we're so conditioned for these intense experiences, these highs and these lows, especially in personal growth, where, you go to these seminars or you go to these weekend workshops and it's like rah, and you're supposed to feel all this intensity. In the end, you're like, I'm on fire. That was incredible. I had this huge experience. And then when you do somatic work, it's like, okay, pick a place, in your body that feels relaxed, and see if you can feel where that is, feel that warmth, feel that safety. And now just move that feeling of safety throughout your whole body.
mm,
Or look around the room, look above, look at the floor, look behind you, notice where you are in the room. And as you're noticing where you are in the room, notice how you're feeling inside your body as well. Can you be in the space, aware and present, and also present in your own body at the same time? And that helps me be in relationship with myself while also being in relationship with you without fusing, right? Without completely losing myself. And so, those are just two examples of really little simple somatic practices that make a huge difference. They make such a difference. And so ultimately, somatic means body. And so
mhm.
what we're really doing is we're just learning how to come back to our bodies to actually feel what's going on instead of disassociating or becoming highly anxious and pursuing or running away and avoiding and shutting down or placating, fawning, people pleasing. All of these things are our nervous system feeling a dysregulation, not feeling safe, and then having sort of a dysfunctional response that doesn't help us get the result we want, which is connection and love. And so what we're doing, in my programs and in a lot of other, practices with somatic work is about learning how to feel safe in your own body again, learning how to become secure so that little things can be processed, so that little things don't turn into big things. And so that relationships can be more easeful and healthy instead of these roller coasters where chaos is what feels familiar and exciting. And so that is ultimately why I'm so passionate about doing that work because, like I said before, what are we doing this for? It's so we can feel joy and feel the full spectrum of our feelings and just be happy in relationship instead of needing this tumultuous energy to carry us because that's what we're conditioned to believe is normal, or that we think love is chaos, because that is not fun. And when we have families, it's even more important that we learn how to regulate our nervous systems because we have a whole host of other little people who are relying on us for them to feel safe. If we feel safe, they feel safe. And if we don't feel safe, they can't feel safe either.
It's, what I love so much about your work and what you teach is that everything that we've talked about in the previous episode, in this episode, and in your work, it really helps everybody feel understood and that we're not alone in this. Like we all, this is the human experience. Like everybody has something they've endured in their life. And ultimately, all of us just want to feel safe, loved, and heard and
Mhm.
accepted. So, that's what I think like in the work you're sharing today is helping more people feel understood. Cause I think when people are in their chaos, if you want to say their trauma or misery, they feel alone and they feel like, oh, nobody's going to understand this. And then they don't share it. They don't be vulnerable and they instead shut down and then disconnect more from who they truly are. And so that's why I think this work is so important to share in all your teachings. It's the critical work we all need to do, but it's also, it doesn't have to be so overwhelming. Like I think that it the self-healing work can seem overwhelming, but it also could be very beautiful because it's like, oh, I'm taking this step to become a better person so I could be a better mother, a father, better
Mhm.
person in the world, do better work, like serve my purpose. So it's really beautiful. Just to touch on relationship patterns a little bit,
Mhm.
I know there's so many different patterns, and some of these things, as you were kind of brushing over, is that we tend to go into things that are familiar that help us feel safe. And sometimes that safe feeling is actually chaos. And so, how
Mhm.
could people get more like doing the relationship work, working on ourselves and healing those past patterns? What would be like some of the first initial steps we should take to address really what's going on and how we could work towards healing? First of all,
Mhm.
get the book and get the program and get the workbook that you have coming up, of course.
Yeah, I have a journal now that's coming out in September, and so that's a great place to practice if you wanted to actually have a tool to interact with a lot of prompts and different exercises, especially around relationship patterns. But ultimately, I think really connecting with your inner child and also your inner teen, those are two really important things. Knowing, what is my conditioning? What did I learn about love and about relationship from watching my family and how my mom and my dad, or just my mom or just my dad, interacted with other people? What did they say about men? What did they say about women? What parts of me did I feel like I had to put to bed or go dormant in order to be welcomed and accepted and loved? And what is my default? I work with two kinds of people in relationship. And all the women in my programs right now, I mainly run this Freedom from Relationship program. We do it live just a few times a year. Just since becoming a mom, I've had to really trim down what I offer. And I've been loving doing that because we just get so many amazing people who are either one of two types, and one is water and one is fire. I always work with
Mm,
water and fire. And water types, quick to sadness, quick to tears, afraid of their anger, hard time expressing it, really hard time expressing it, struggle with boundaries, really nice people pleasers. And then we have the fire types, pretty great with boundaries, pretty fierce, quick to anger, not quick, not easy to show the vulnerability, have a hard time letting people in to see their sadness, right? There's like a more of an inner guard dog there.
mm,
And so when you know what type you are, if you're a water type or you're a fire type, then you can see where your deepest work is, right? You need to basically uncover, where do I need to grow in relationship? And so if that's speaking your truth, or if that's setting boundaries, only you know. But usually it comes down to figuring out what you need to do to shift the pattern, to shake things up by showing up in a new way that might feel like a stretch for you, or a way that might feel uncomfortable or scary or vulnerable for you, but a way that will no doubt qualify people better because they're seeing who you actually are. And so that's the work that we do when we are starting to uncover our relationship patterns.
beautiful. And you touched on the vulnerability piece. And I feel like that is, I know sharing in your story, that was the one thing you struggled with before entering your relationship with your current husband. And I'm
Mhm.
just curious, how did you get to a place to feel comfortable sharing your story? I don't know if the first time you shared it was with your current husband, Ben, because I know you did the work and then you met him not that long afterwards. But
Yeah.
how did you get comfortable being vulnerable, being sharing your story and everything you've been through, because I think a lot of people still struggle with that because they don't want to be judged or
Mhm.
seen as something maybe that they don't want to be seen as, or that they're different, or
Mhm.
so how do you work through that?
Well, I think the important thing to remember is that we all have a story, and that pretty much anyone you talk to, if you really get to know them, is going to be able to resonate with part of your story. And we've all been through stuff. I think I can't remember who it was. I think maybe it was Brene Brown who said, like, everyone has a story that'll make you cry. It's the idea that we're somehow really unique and that we're so wounded or so, messed up that nobody could possibly understand. That's definitely not the case. I've worked with thousands and thousands of people, and everybody has an incredible story that will touch your heart. And we're all not so different. Things might look or sound a little bit different. The path to get there might have been different. But there's nobody that's too broken. And ultimately, we just have to remember we're all human beings. We're just all on this journey together. And when I started sharing my story, I was sharing it, with my partner. I was sharing it inside of held containers. I was doing a lot of deeper tantra work and um, healing work with groups in group containers. And so I obviously wasn't coming out and, broadcasting my intimate, most vulnerable things to people I don't know. I think it's important that we practice containment in those areas and that we really hold our process sacred and that we share it with people who can hold us, who can really hold our depth. And so, that's how I started is sharing, with people where I felt safe. And when we're sharing with people who, maybe don't know us very well, or if it's, let's say you're a counselor or you're some sort of healer, or you're in some sort of public profession where, sharing your story could impact others. I always encourage people to only share what they feel really complete with. If you feel dysregulated in your body, if your voice is starting to crack up, and if you feel really unsafe or tense or tight or triggered in any way when you're sharing something intimate and vulnerable with a large audience, I would say that it's not time to share that thing yet, right? That is still alchemizing in you, and it's not clean. It's not clean to share it because that's your process for you to navigate and to move through. And if you want to share that with people who love you and can hold you in that, that's beautiful. But I would encourage not letting, the outside world in until when you share it, there's not a lot of energetic charge to it. And so that's the principle that I follow in my own life too. I don't write about things the moment I experience them, or I don't go on and share something in the moment I'm having an experience. I wait sometimes years before I share anything about it until I feel complete with that experience and I feel like the medicine of that journey has really integrated in me.
It's so true that I love that you share that not everything needs to be shared until you've
Mhm,
processed it and until you feel comfortable in sharing it. But I do believe sharing our story or sharing something that possibly you are going through and sharing with others, I think is for others to see you. I think it's for us to show truly, not to be hiding behind something that is not the truth. And I think it's beautiful. And I recently shared something on my social media, and I was actually surprised by the response. And I thought it really made me feel good. The reason being, it's like I didn't expect to get that response, but it was basically just sharing, like, this is what I went through. And I shared part of my history with, basically, I recently got baptized and I've been a Christian for some time. Since I was like
mhm,
14, I became a Christian, but I shared my story of that. And it was just so beautiful, the response. And people were saying, thank you for sharing your story. Like, this is so beautiful. And it just made me feel, again, more seen and more humanized, I guess. So I think that when you're ready to share that, I think that you could connect with people on a deeper level, but you don't have to
mhm.
share everything, of course.
Well, for sure. And even just when you say, it made me feel more seen and understood. Now imagine that you share something and you don't feel seen and understood, right? And that's why it's so important to share when it's really integrated, when you feel clear and confident and secure in who you are. And if people come at you, you're not going to get completely blown over by it. And that it's
Or triggered.
self-preservation, honoring. something. Yeah, right? And so, social media is just wild. It's just, wow, wow, wow. And so that's another thing too is, keep your process for you until you feel like it doesn't matter if people approve or if they disapprove. You don't need their validation. Of course, it feels nice when we feel seen and we feel understood. Um, and there's that nuance there again, right? Is like, are you really ready to share? And it sounds like you really works. This has been like a long journey for you. Um, yeah, I like to remind people of that, especially, I work with a lot of people who are in the healing profession or they're guides in some way. And they're like, I don't want to share all of my personal stuff, with the world on Instagram, but it feels like I have to in order to be successful. And
Mm,
that's not necessarily true. Right. And so, yes, you can share, but share what you're ready to share.
yeah, absolutely. So I want to
Mhm.
do something a little different since I have your book in front of me. Like I said, I think I read your book twice actually. It's
Oh,
so, so good. No, it's like, honestly, I'm gonna read it again, I promise you, because I just
oh,
pulled it off the shelf. I'm like, "You know what? I wanna read it again because it's so good," and I highlighted the crap out of it. It's so awesome, but I'm just gonna open it up to something and just see, maybe we could have a conversation just where I randomly open it up to. Okay, we just talked about that. So let's just see. Okay, understanding your projections. This is something
mm,
I'm sure a lot of people have heard that we project onto our partner and
mm.
how that could really influence and harm our relationship. So, if you could kind of touch on that a little bit about projections and how to notice to stop ourselves in that behavior, and again, to be aware and check ourselves in that.
Yeah. Well, maybe we won't be able to completely stop the projections because it's just so human and natural to project. But what if we could own it, right? What if we could catch ourselves and then say, okay, actually, maybe I'm being a little hard on you because somebody else hurt me in the past, or, I'm projecting some figure onto you from my history or from society, even that I don't like. And perhaps I don't know what your intentions are. Or I don't know what you were trying to say, right? A projection is really just us deciding who another person is and what their intentions are without being clear in communication. I often would have projections of, bullies from the past onto my partner, Ben, because he's a very strong personality, very strong opinions, loves to tell me how I should be doing things. He's just a strong person, but I'm a pretty strong person too. So both of us together, we can butt heads. And so my inner wounding would often feel like he was trying to control me or be a bully. And that was stemming from my own history. And when I really connect with him on a heart level and clear that with him, it's never the case. He's always got good intentions. He's just bringing it in a way that doesn't work for me. And so it's important that we realize to check ourselves. That's the work of conscious relationship, isn't to do it perfectly. It's not to never have anger outbursts or to never say the wrong thing or, to do it all harmoniously all the time. It's really about learning how to own where we fell off track or make repair when needed or clear with each other or do check-ins, say, hey, like this is what I was experiencing from you. This is the story that I'm making up. Is any of that true? What was your actual intention? What are you actually trying to say? What are you feeling? Get out of that self-centered bubble that we live in, all of us, in relationship, where we're constantly making everything about us, which,
Right.
makes sense. That's our job. And figure out, okay, well, what are you feeling in this? Like, what's happening for you? So that maybe I can also have a little bit of empathy and maybe we can connect and figure out what do we need to do to feel better together. That's ultimately the work of healing our projections in conscious relationship.
Is there still work that you two do in your container? I'm sure becoming new parents. Is there something that has come up for both of you that you two work on in your relationship? Like any practice that you would say has been super helpful in your marriage and as parents?
Mhm. Oh my gosh, we just did a two-part interview series that we put on our YouTube channels about
Awesome.
us and like our whole journey becoming parents, and it was so vulnerable. um, we just talked about how hard it's been, how hard it's actually been. And definitely we were in this place where things were so easy between us and we had really figured it all out. And we were like, okay, we're ready to have a family now. Like, let's shake things up. Obviously, if we want to grow more, we need to do something new because we're in just such a stable place together. And it just changes so much. It shakes things up. We have no time for each other. There's not a lot of time to talk about any little energetic misgivings or anything that hurt us throughout the day. We're tired, we're underslept, we're snappy. Like, there's just so much. I'm anxious, because I have this perfect little being that I'm desperately in love with, that I'm just so terrified of getting hurt or losing, and so I'm on edge more than I've ever been. And I'm working through that initial feeling of, how to let go and how to support her in, learning how to be in her body and, protect her, but not too much. And it's just so much. And so, yeah, it's been hard for us. It's been hard. I think for most parents it is. And so we talked about that a little bit. And we also touched on a few of the things that really help us, which one is appreciation. Like, there's this very simple practice, which is just saying 3 things that you are grateful for in your person every day before bed. Like 3 things that you're grateful for that they did or that they embodied for you that day, like simple things, even like, I'm so grateful that you carried the groceries in, or I'm so grateful that you, threw in a load of laundry, or I'm so grateful that you brought me a cup of water. Like, we have to start practicing being grateful to our partners and outwardly appreciating them, even for the things that we think that they should do. You hear people say all the time, well, why should I thank them for that? That's like, they live here too. It's their job. And yeah, it is. But I always love being appreciated when I clean up or when I do something for my husband. A lot of the small gestures that I make are out of love for him. And when he appreciates me for that, I feel nice inside, and that's really something that we all have to get better at, is really practicing that in the moment. So that's one of the things that can really turn your relationship around, because the Gottmans talk about how you need more positive interactions than negative interactions for your marriage to thrive, right? And if you
Yeah.
think about it, one of the easy ways to get that is to focus on appreciation and praise throughout the day with your
Gratitude.
partner, or at least right before bed. Yeah.
I love that. Simplest thing, but just noticing, like, just, yeah, acknowledging the other person in their little things. That simple acknowledgement, I think, goes a long way. Beautiful. So you have, as we kind of touched on, you have this new journal that's coming out, which it will be available once this episode releases. So I want to make everybody make sure they get it. It's beautiful for anybody watching on YouTube. If you want to show them the journal,
Mm.
it's so gorgeous.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful journal. I'm really, really happy with it. And there's just so much that went into this. There's so much art. There's a lot of different nature rituals. There's
Love
some,
it.
simple bath recipes, practices. It's not just writing. Some of it is somatic based as well, and very nature based, to help connect you back to yourself and to the elements and to this feeling of safety in your body and also with nature. So I really love it.
So beautiful. Okay, everything will of course be in the show notes. Like I
Mhm.
said, top recommended book is Becoming the One. And actually I've seen on other people that have shared relationship books, your book is there. I've seen it on multiple social media shares. So it's
Mhm.
recommended by so many people. It's a must read. And then also I know I'm going to get the guided journal myself, because I think, this work, like I said, it doesn't mean something is wrong with you, that you have this, you know, so much to work on. It's honestly just taking ownership of your life and living in more joy and coming home to yourself. And I think all of us could do more of that. So it's so
Totally.
beautiful. And so thank you for everything you shared today. So much more wisdom. And I'm just going to ask you the question I always ask my guests at the end, which is, if you were to share a piece of wisdom, a life lesson that you've learned maybe in the past year of becoming a mother or wherever it may be, what would that piece of wisdom be and why?
Mm. Hmm. It's a beautiful question. People always ask this on the end of their podcast, and I'm like, there's so many things to share, but the thing that always comes through for me is that the only thing that really truly matters in this life is family. And that could be your chosen family, it could be the family that you've just created, it could be your community that feels like family, but ultimately that's what feels true. See, we can't take anything else with us. And at the end of the day, whatever drama is happening around us at work or in our personal lives, what we take with us when we go, I believe, is the connections in our heart, the people that we loved. And I think that that's the most important thing, is to really give our energy and our presence to those relationships, and to bring it fully, to love with our open hearts. Because at the end of the day, I think that's what people will regret most if they don't do it. You're not going to take all of the accolades or the book deals or the podcasts or the achievements you had at your career. You're not going to take any of that with you.
Beautiful. I love it. Sheleana, this has been such an honor. I so appreciate you and thank you for all the work you do. I know you're changing millions of lives and really helping people heal their pasts and transform their relationships and come home to themselves. So thank you for
Mm,
all the work and thank you for being on the show again. Appreciate you.
Thanks so much.